Good afternoon and welcome to the next short video in the Ahargana series. In this tutorial, we will take a look at how certain astronomical techniques are used by historians to date very ancient historic events. So in a way, this tutorial is a bit of a digression. This is not about the Hindu calendar and astronomy, but instead this is about astronomy and history. So we start as always. Here is the ecliptic and here is Meshadi, which is 180 degrees opposite of Chitra nakshatra. And this is the Nirayana starting point, 0 degrees of a Nirayana calendric elements. And this is fixed in space, doesn't change with time. On the other hand, we have the other 4 points, the 2 Vishuvats and the 2 Ayanas, which are 90 degrees apart from each other. But these change with time. They drift about 1 degree every 72 years. Very, very slowly they move, but they move. Now, in the previous video, we have seen the movement of the Vasanta Vishuvat. I ran time backwards and showed you that Vasanta Vishuvat goes towards Meshadi, and long time back in 285 AD, it coincided with Meshadi. At that time, I had shown you the Rashi Mandala here and shown that Meshadi remains fixed with respect to Mesha Rashi and the asterisms, but Vasanta Vishuvat moves. This time, I am going to show you the nakshatra mandala. You will see a little bit later why I am doing this. So here Meshadi is the beginning of Ashwini nakshatra, and then this is the Ashwini nakshatra segment. These plus symbols demarcate the nakshatra segment. So this is Ashwini, this is Bharani, Kritika, etc. Now let me go back. Similar to the previous video, I will zoom in to one specific portion of the ecliptic. And here is Vasanta Vishuvat. And Vasanta Vishuvat is inside Uttara Bhadrapada nakshatra, because this is the starting point and the ending point of Uttara Bhadrapada. So here is Vasanta Vishuvat. I am going to now run time backwards and show you Vasanta Vishuvat moving towards Meshadi. You have seen this already, but this time I am going to overlay history on top of astronomy. For example, let me change the date a little bit. I now brought it to 2021, our 75th Independence Day, August 15, 2021. Here is Vasanta Vishuvat, and you know wherever Vasanta Vishuvat is, that is 0 degrees of the Sayana zodiac. Now I move time backwards, and here is Vasanta Vishuvat on the first Indian Independence Day, 1947. Pardon me that up here it doesn't show the exact year, it shows 1948, but because I'm moving the animation so fast that it does not stop exactly where I want it to stop. It sometimes overshoots, sometimes falls a bit short, but I am showing you the year here, 1947. So Vasanta Vishuvat moved this much from the time we got independence till today. This is modern India with our existing constitution and borders and the democratic system. So let me go backwards in time, and I am coming to 1761, the third battle of Panipat. Now, the third battle of Panipat is the one where the Maratha army under the leadership of Sadashivarav Bhau lost to Ahmad Shah Durrani. And this marked the beginning of the end of Maratha supremacy or suzerainty over India. But the interesting point is, just a few years before that, in fact just 4 years before that, was another famous battle, the Battle of Plassey. And this is where Robert Clive defeated Siraj ud Dawla, and that was the beginning of the British colonization of India. So these two events were separated just by 4 years. They happened pretty much at the same time, when the Marathas pretty much lost the plot and the British started their colonization of India. So what I am doing here now is I am showing you a timeline of history, and ecliptic has become the timeline. And the Vasanta Vishuvat has become a marker of certain historic events. And I'm only showing you some events, not all events, which are interesting, because these two events, when you see them on a timeline, you realize that the Marathas lost the plot and the British gained suzerainty over India around the same time. Maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe it is a cause and effect thing. I don't know. I'm just pointing out to you that when you see things on a timeline, new insights arise. Going backwards in time a little bit more, here is the Vasanta Vishuvat moving backwards. And I now have come to 1526, the first battle of Panipat. So this is when Babur invaded India. There was already an Islamic empire in India, Lodi Empire. So this was Ibrahim Lodi, and Babur defeated Ibrahim Lodi. So this was the beginning of the Mughal Empire in India. Correct? Now what was interesting to me was that a few years before that, about 28 years before that, Vasco da Gama had already arrived in India. This came as a surprise to me. I didn't realize that Vasco da Gama arrived in India, the Portuguese arrived in India even before Babur did. Not that it makes any difference, but it is just interesting because I have always studied history, the colonial history separate, Mughal history separate, but when you combine them on a timeline, it becomes interesting. In fact, I realized that, I'm not showing it here, but I realized that a Basilica Bom Jesus in Goa, that's a church, was built almost 50 years before the Taj Mahal was built, which means by the time Taj Mahal was built, the Portuguese were already very much established in India and watching the Taj Mahal being built. So continuing back, using the ecliptic as the timeline and the Vasanta Vishuvat as a historic marker, I am arriving at 1025 AD. The sacking of Somnath. This is a seminal event in the history of India. It has left a scar on the psyche of most Indians, specifically those who live north of the Vindhyas. And why I say that is because south of the Vindhyas, literally on the same year, the story was very different, because the Chola king Rajendra Cholan launched a naval invasion of Indonesia in 1025, literally on the same period. So south of the Vindhyas in Tamil Nadu, this was the high point of the Chola Empire, the rule of Rajendra Cholan and his father Rajaraja Cholan, who by the way is Ponniyin Selvan. So if you ever felt that the histories of North India and South India are somewhat different, you get a feel for that difference here when I use the ecliptic as a timeline and show you using Vasanta Vishuvat as a marker the comparative dates of these historic events. I go further back in time. I'm not going to show you too much more from here because there is another reason why I am doing this whole tutorial, and I will get to this in a moment. I'll just show you another marker. Here is 476 AD, which was when Aryabhatta was born. And you can say Aryabhatta is the father of Indian astronomy. And just before, maybe 50 or 100 years before him, Surya Siddhanta was written. And that is the document on which I have based a large part of the Ahargana series. So the knowledge which I am showing you in the Ahargana series started here, and it came down this period to the current period, and I am showing it to you in the Ahargana serial. Going further back, we come to the period when Vasanta Vishuvat coincides with Meshadi, and I told you that this was the Gupta period. And this is where the previous episode had stopped. But now I'm going to let this run even further back because I really want to look at history such a long time back that it becomes difficult to date events, because these events we know very well. There are a lot of records available, literally documents are available in Marathi, in Persian, in English, which was written by the Marathas, the Mughals, the British. A lot of documents are available. But the farther back in time you go, the less evidence is available. So let me go beyond this, further back, and we reach the limits of historic India. So first we come to the period of Jesus Christ, which is the epochal point for the Christian calendar, and this is the calendar we use for our civil life every day. Now I go beyond this. As I said, we reach the limits of the historical period of India when we hit the period of Ashoka the Great, 304 BC, that minus 304, the minus indicates before the period of Christ. And his father, Ashoka's grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya, minus 321 BC. This is considered the limits of historic India, meaning from this period we have records. Particularly Ashoka left lots and lots of inscriptions all over the country. But if you go back beyond this point, you are entering the prehistory of India, where things are not very sure. And that's where astronomy starts playing an interesting role. So let me continue one more event I will show you, which is the birth of Gautama Buddha, about 563 BC. Even this is not certain because this is part of prehistory, unsure. But somewhere around that period, 563 or 600 BC, is where Buddha's life is placed. Now, if you go beyond this, I am repositioning the screen. Here is Vasanta Vishuvat. Now, if you go beyond this, there is a lot of uncertainty. There are really only two types of evidences available if you go beyond this. One is archaeological evidence, and I am talking about the Indus Valley Civilization, IVC to be short. The other evidences we have is actually coming from ancient literary works, and I am talking about the Vedas. The Rig, Yajur, Sama and Atharva Vedas. And these ancient literary works contain astronomical references. Either they are straightforward or they may be disguised as stories, as tales with colorful imagery, which you have to interpret. So let's take an example. Before going into the Vedas, I will go to a Vedanga called Jyotisha Vedanga. This is a calendric text, not so much astronomical, but the entire calendar which I have described to you in the Ahargana series is described in Jyotisha Vedanga also. I have not studied that extensively. I have focused on Surya Siddhanta, which came much later. But Jyotisha Vedanga, I believe it contains all of these calendric elements. But when was it written? That is not known. And who wrote it is also not known. Now, as for who wrote it, astronomy cannot help us, but as for when was it written, astronomy can give us a clue, and this is the crux of this tutorial. So, Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak, on whom I depend a lot for many of these last few episodes, he says that in Jyotisha Vedanga, there is a clear reference saying Vasanta Vishuvat was 10 degrees inside Bharani nakshatra. What does that mean? That means, so here we are right now, Vasanta Vishuvat is here, and this is in the Ashwini nakshatra segment. This is Ashwini. And the Bharani nakshatra segment starts here and extends still here. Correct? So I'm going to let the animation run. And if it is 10 degrees inside Bharani nakshatra, that means starting from here about 10 degrees. So it may be, this whole thing is 13 degrees 20 minutes, so maybe somewhere here. So let's wait and see when Vasanta Vishuvat comes to that point. Okay, so this should be 10 degrees, but what I am finding is, according to Stellarium, this is 8 degrees, but the calculation which Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak says, that in 1269 BC, minus 1269, Vasanta Vishuvat came to 10 degrees inside Bharani. So I am taking his date, I am ignoring what Stellarium is showing, and this is where Vasanta Vishuvat is. And it is also pretty close to Bharani nakshatra. What do I mean by saying close? It seems so far away, right? But the ecliptic longitude is pretty close. This is this close. It's only a little bit before the Bharani constellation. So by using that astronomical reference, Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak calculated that Jyotisha Vedanga was written in 1269 BC or thereabouts. I mean, you cannot be very sure about this. Maybe 1250 or 1200, somewhere there. That's the period it was written. Now, this is quite intriguing because most people say that anything to do with Vedas, even the oldest Veda, was written 500 BC. That is around the time of Buddha. Whereas Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak says it was written around 1269 BC. And this was also problematic for Western scholars because they claim that the Greeks invented astronomy and the Hindus borrowed from the Greeks. But the Greek civilization, classical Greek civilization, was 300 BC. And this is 1000 years before that. So though the astronomical evidence is clear, there is still not much acceptance of this date. I would like you to know that because there is no further corroborating evidence which is available. It is a single evidence sitting there. Now, if you go further back, and indeed Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak does go further back to the Rig and Yajur Vedas because they are the oldest Vedas, and he hunts for astronomical references inside those. Now remember, the Vedas, unlike Jyotisha Vedanga, are not astronomical works. They are not calendaric texts. They are about rituals, they are about spirituality, about philosophy and all that, but they are definitely not astronomical works. So what Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak does is he takes many pointers which are available there and interprets them in such a way that they become astronomical in nature. And that is where the uncertainty lies. You have to either accept what he does or you reject it. But assuming I accept what he does, he says that there is something called the Taitiriya Samhita and Taitiriya Brahmana. These were written at a time when the Vasanta Vishuvat was near Kritika nakshatra. And he argues that at that time, Kritika nakshatra did not mean this segment. It literally meant the Vasanta Vishuvat was somewhere here, close to Kritika nakshatra. So when was that? Once again, I run the animation, Vasanta Vishuvat is moving. But before I get there, I will also point out to you another thing, that this date of Vedanga Jyotisha actually coincides with a certain date on the Indus Valley civilization timeline. And that is literally the end of the Indus Valley civilization, 1300 BC. After this, Indus Valley civilization completely disappeared, meaning it was already disappearing before. By 1300, it was dead. And the people had moved to the Gangetic plain, the Ganga. Civilization moved there. So if Jyotisha Vedanga is dated at this period, was it written by the same people? This is also not fully accepted. Nobody still agrees that Indus Valley people wrote the Vedas. That concrete statement is not established yet. But this is what Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak is going towards, that maybe it is the same Indus Valley people who wrote Jyotisha Vedanga. Now let me continue the animation. I want to see when this comes to Kritika nakshatra. So let us wait. Now it's crossed over the Kritika nakshatra boundary, entered Kritika nakshatra, and I'm finding now that one more marker of Indus Valley civilization has happened. This is called the late Harappan period. That means from here onwards, the Indus Valley civilization started declining, going into decline, and by 1300 BC it completely ended. This is what archaeologists say. But I am still waiting for Vasanta Vishuvat to reach Kritika nakshatra. And here it has finally reached Kritika nakshatra at 2350 BC. So Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak says that this is the date on which Taitiriya Samhita as well as Taitiriya Brahmana were written. Again, this date is huge because this date literally places us alongside the Babylonian civilization. Because this is the time when on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, there was a civilization called the Babylonian civilization, and they left behind literally tens of thousands of clay tablets on which there are astronomical and many other inscriptions. So the antiquity of the Vedas, Taitiriya Samhita is part of the Vedas, has been pushed back to 2550 BC. But once again, I repeat, Taitiriya Samhita is not an astronomical text, and Sri Tilak does a lot of imaginative interpretation of the text to arrive at this marker saying Vasanta Vishuvat was at Kritika. It's not straightforward written in so many words there. Now, more interesting than that, he also says that these texts, both Taitiriya Brahmana and Taitiriya Samhita, refer to an even older period when the Vasanta Vishuvat was in Mrigashiras. What does that mean? That means, so for example, today we say Makara Sankranti is the beginning of Uttarayana. That is not true today. But we still remember that. That was true only in 285 AD. But in 2023, we still remember that. And we still celebrate a festival like that. Same way, Sri Tilak is pointing out that in Taitiriya Brahmana and Samhita, there are references to an even older period. They are remembering when Vasanta Vishuvat was in Mrigashiras. They are referring, saying, at that time, Vasanta Vishuvat was in Mrigashiras. So that Mrigashiras is here. So now I need to see when does Vasanta Vishuvat come to this part of the ecliptic. So let me run that. So it's once again moving. Now it is going to exit Kritika Nakshatra. But before that, we have hit another Indus Valley civilization marker called the mature Harappan period. So this is where the Indus Valley civilization really came into its own, fully flourishing from here to here. 2600 to 1900 BC, it was fully flourishing. After that, it declined and ended at 1300. So it seems like Taitiriya Samhita and Taitiriya Brahmana were written by the Indus Valley people, or rather were composed by the Indus Valley people when the civilization was in its prime, very mature. Going further back, I'm still waiting for Vasanta Vishuvat to get to Mrigashiras. That must be somewhere here. But you will see we hit another Indus Valley marker before we get there. And that is the early Harappan period, because literally in 3300 BC, Indus Valley civilization started. Just started. And it took so much time for it to become mature. And then it stayed mature and then started declining. And from here, it declined and finally ended here. This is the entire timeline of the Indus Valley civilization. But we have to go further back for Vasanta Vishuvat to get to Mrigashira. So now it is exiting Rohini Nakshatra. This segment is Rohini Nakshatra. Now finally it is in Mrigashira's Nakshatra segment. But I am waiting for it to get to Mrigashira's Nakshatra itself. Because in such olden days, they would not have had enough observational ability to mark such segments of nakshatras. They literally meant Vasanta Vishuvat is in the background of Mrigashira's Nakshatra. So is it really? Yep. So here is the line and it's very close to Mrigashira's Nakshatra, ecliptic longitude. And when did that happen? 4000 BC. So clearly these conclusions of Sri Bal Gangadhar Tilak are controversial, to say the least. They are not accepted because this is pushing back the antiquity of the Indus Valley civilization and not IVC, antiquity of the Vedas to very remote periods, even before the Indus Valley civilization, when practically nothing existed in the Indus. So in fact, Sri Tilak argues that maybe this was a period when our ancestors and the Iranians were together in Iran. And he speculates that even further back, if you go many millennia back, our ancestors and the Iranians and the Greeks were all together somewhere else called known as the Central Asia, which is today Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, those areas. And from there, one branch went to Greece, one branch came and stopped at Iran, and another branch came up to the Indus Valley civilization, and they were all at one time Aryans and living together. But my point is not to go into all those speculations. It's all extremely interesting. I enjoy reading about all this. But the idea I want to convey in this tutorial is that the position of this Vasanta Vishuvat becomes very, very useful when you are trying to date ancient events, because this moves so slowly. So if you get a clue that the Vasanta Vishuvat was in some specific place when some extremely ancient event happened, you can use that clue to fix a date on it. Now, how accurate is it? Is it trustworthy? That depends on your clue, how good that clue was and how trustworthy your understanding and interpretation of the Vedas and on those documents is. But the idea is a slow moving Vasanta Vishuvat due to precession of the equinox. It gives an extra tool for historians to use. That is what I wanted to convey in this tutorial. So I will stop this tutorial here. Thank you very much for watching.